If you can't tell already, Bob Geldof is sitting across from me in the Q studio. How are you?
Good, dude, and there isn't a single fiddle or accordion on it.
I still somehow like it. I don't know how. I mean, it's a stretch, and I'm not going to lie to you, I overdubbed some myself. Just to try and make it a bit more commercial.
I'll have you on the next one.
Do you mind hearing the old songs?
I get fed up with this because, it's not out of character lyrically or emotionally. It's, the problem would be that if you're specifically known for a singular song, that people think that you're just a sort of, a band that plays piano type tunes, and that's rather limiting. I do like the tune, though, and it maintains its relevance. It doesn't have to be, you said in 1979. If I do it now, and I do it, I don't, demur, or I don't think, oh God, this song. The very opposite. As soon as I hear that glissando at the beginning, it's almost like, a mantra that gets you into some meditative state. As soon as I hear the opening, I'm back in a zone. And that zone is the zone of the now, because it's not about something that happened in 1979. It could be the latest school shooting of 2 weeks ago, unfortunately.
I guess that's the saddest part of it. And I want to talk about all this in just a second. But,
yeah.
When I hear it, well, it's become something else. It's become like a song that reminds people of their childhood, or reminds people listening to the radio when they were, dating someone for the first time. And they may not even hear what the lyrics were about. They might not even remember what the lyrics are about.
Yeah.
But the lyrics are about a shooting, a real shooting that happened in a school. And it's sort of sad and painful that you can essentially sing it now and not change anything. And it'll still feel...
Yeah, I mean... Look, I'm not forcing this interview in a direction, but the reality is that as soon as we regrouped, if you like, the first thing I said is I'm not going to do nostalgia if this is just sounds old, and I'm bored by these songs, that they have no resonance for the now. Then I'm not going to do it. And I Don't Like Mondays is a case in point. The minute they started it. I was, I wasn't back then. I was very much in the present. Another song, our first #1, Rat Trap, I wrote it in an abattoir where I was working. And I wrote it about the hopelessness of the people there, less the hopelessness and inevitable death of the animals, but the sort of abattoir of dreams that this place was. And if I sing it now, I'm not in the abattoir. I'm talking about the hopelessness of being young and now, and the conditions of things here today. Someone's looking at you, a big hit in Canada. I'm not talking about that time. I'm talking about Google and Facebook tracking you, following you, listening to you, always on, packaging you and your every nuance or joke or friends or musical choice or food selection, packaging you up and selling you to a third party who will exploit you and your preferences. So someone's looking at you becomes a new rage, a new anger. So it all sorts of works. They outlived their time, and I'm glad of that.
Was that that's the motivation for regrouping. Was that the motivation for grouping in the first place? Because I can't see you crowd sitting around a conservatory wondering if you could play music together.
No, and that just wasn't available. I mean, what was available, and put it in perspective with what was happening elsewhere. So New York, 1975, is bankrupt. Social services have stopped. You can barely walk in the streets. The garbage isn't being collected. You can't drive in the streets. And the mayor pleads to the US president for help. And Gerald Ford, literally and famously, says, drop dead New York. Well, of course, out of that will come something from people denied a future. So you get the Ramones, Patti Smith, Blondie, Talking Heads, etc. Exact same time in London, inflation is 27% in the UK economy, zero economy. And you get sharp kids like Johnny Rotten, Johnny Lydon and Joe Strummer saying, I don't think so. And in Ireland, exact same time, a civil war, 3,700 people, 600 people murdered. Utterly corrupt government, a corrupt church that's busily abusing the children of its parishioners and hushing it up, and a zero economy. Of course there's going to be an eruption amongst this claustrophobia of silence, this suffocation of silence that enveloped the country. Just turned out to be us.
So how do you deal with it then? If these things are born out of a struggle or standing up for a working class, I mean, your band is named after Woody Guthrie's old gang, you know?
Yeah.
How do you then deal with popularity when you start becoming famous? The Boomtown Rats start doing well.
You embrace it hugely.
Really?
You use the platform that fame gives you to talk about the things that prompted you in the first place.
It's not uncomfortable?
Stardom is uncomfortable. Celebrity is a nothing. I was never interested in stardom, as you can see. Like, I'm a crap star. If anyone considers me a star, I'm just not good at that stuff. I'm not good at red carpets. It's mortifying. I'm not good at the limousine thing. You know, I feel an idiot in a limousine. I really do. You know, I mean, if it shows up and my mate shows up in a beat up Honda Prius, I'm going to take the limousine, dude, you know. But, you know, swanning by and people waving, banging and looking in the window, I feel a fraud. It's the fraud syndrome. But the fame thing I'd always wanted, I said it at the beginning, and the first interview, I said I wanted it for the platform it'll give me to talk about the things that bother me. And I used to work out in Vancouver on an underground paper there, the Georgia Strait, and Paul Watson, the great hero of Greenpeace, had got his trawler, the Sea Shepherd, and converted it. And he used to go up to the Arctic Circle to stop the Japanese and Russian whalers. And, you know, these brave people out of Vancouver would put themselves in rubber dinghies and put themselves across in front of the whales. And, in fact, the Japanese whalers would try and harpoon them. And subsequently, when we got to be a big pop band, I could talk in Trafalgar Square about this now. And in fact, in the song, Someone's Looking at You, on the album that was platinum in this country, there's a line, you saw me there in the square when I was shooting my mouth off about saving some fish. And then I question myself, I say, can that be construed as a radical view or some liberal's wish? You know, I mean, I knew perfectly well what I was doing. And then, you know, I did a lot of the early Amnesty gigs and the later ones, and then sang on the Sun City record, etc., etc. Yeah. So you see, the point is, rock and roll was always about that for me. It was always about the possibility of change.
It was an avenue to activism.
It was, and that's what the suggestion of being a kid and listening to what was then, you know, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, the Beatles, etc. It was, they sang to that, and they sang about the possibility of change, the inevitability, the desirability of change. The world was not immutable. It was, in fact, plastic and could be moulded and shaped towards the desire you wanted it to go in.
And you use that fame in a number of different ways. One of the more famous ways you used it is right here. Take a listen to this.
I think you know the next song. It might be a bit of a cock-up, but if you're going to cock it up, you may as well do it with 2 billion people watching you. So let's cock it up together. Goodbye, Philadelphia. Goodbye, America. We hope you have a good rest of the day. David's going to start this. You ready, guys?
That's my guest, Bob Geldof, singing at Live Aid in 1985. If you're just tuning in, Bob Geldof's band, the Boomtown Rats, have a new record after 36 years. It's called Citizens of Boomtown. A documentary about the band with the same titles coming out soon, plus a new book of Bob's lyrics and Bob's stories about the band called Tale of Boomtown Glory is being released. So Live Aid, I mean, it's hard to understand in 2020 what a soul moment that was for everybody to kind of be watching the same thing. U2, Queen, Tina Turner, Elton John, Bryan Adams, Madonna, Neil Young, Phil Collins, Duran Duran, lots more. And they say that on like a big day, on like a wedding day, you're supposed to take mental images because you're not going to remember any of it. You're just going to go by so quickly. Do you actually remember any of it? Any of that day?
I remember being the pop singer with my band and being able to relax into the familiar, because up to then it was all fear, tension, the organisational continuum. Would it work? Moments, rock and roll moments, stay with me. Just before I hadn't slept the night. I hadn't slept for many nights. I was scared stiff.
What were you scared of?
Failure. Lots of things. I had no contracts with anyone. No contracts with the stadiums. You know, would they let us in? Would anyone show up? I mean, 17 hours of the Boomtown Rats might be a bit much even for me, you know. And so But, personal failure on such, I mean, quite literally, I mean, this sounds silly, I don't take it the wrong way, but literally in a planetary level. And then failure for all those people, some of whom you've named, who'd given up or put aside many, many enmities. Pete Townsend having to make up with Roger Daltrey for a couple of minutes. Paul McCartney coming back after 6 years, not really wanting, he wasn't prepared to do live. Eric Clapton giving up 3 days in Vegas, just saying to hell with it, I'm coming. Led Zeppelin reforming, Black Sabbath reforming, the Beach Boys reforming, The Who reforming, Queen almost dead in the water, and suddenly, you see this great band emerge like a butterfly from a chrysalis. U2, having huge fights at the side of the stage, believing that they'd ended their career. In fact, it tipped them over the top. So those things stick in my head, but really the greatest fear was failing those in whose name we were doing it and who would never know we were doing it and had never heard of any of these people. That would have been a crime more than a failure. So I was very afraid, and that day my back was killing me because I guess I wasn't sleeping. And I was running around all over the place. People were forgetting what it was about because the music and the romance of the day was, and as you said, the soul moment was resonant. Still, people still talk about it. And I was lying down on a flight case, and David Bowie walked over and said, "Turn over." And I turned over, and here's the big secret. David Bowie could have been a great masseuse. And he started massaging me, and that's a great rock and roll moment. And the guys and the Rats came over and said, "Come on, we're on." And I went on, and suddenly it was okay. I was in my job. But what I remember is the romance that everybody else felt hitting me suddenly. And the romance for me was that anyone I'd ever met in my life, my dad and my relationship with him was at best fraught, was there. Anyone I possibly said hello to just in passing was watching. And there were people at this moment in Vladivostok or Tierra del Fuego watching this now. And I needed to pause to take this in, the enormity of this thing.
To take that snapshot.
Or just to accept it and reconcile myself with it, that it was something other. And I pulled up sharp because suddenly the words of that song you started with, I was coming up to the line which was, "The lesson today is how to die." And suddenly just the mad coincidence of everything pulled me up sharp, and I sang, "The lesson today is how to die," and I stopped dead. And my hand was gesturing, and it just stayed up in the air. And there was this massive roar of, I don't know, comprehension or something from the crowd. And I've got to remember this, and I looked to my right and tracked right along the whole length and breadth of Wembley Stadium. And when my eyes came back to me, I just, okay, I'll move on now. And that was when it sort of hit me what it was.
Did it do what you wanted?
Oh, completely. I mean, it's the weirdest thing to be able to say that for once in our lives, something worked. And it wasn't that day. I mean, what's amazing, and you're steeped in music and history, is that people forget Live 8, which Canada hugely participated in.
Well, that was I wasn't around during Live 8. I was around for Live 8.
And Live 8 was the culmination of the project that began with the Christmas song. I see the TV one night, I'm disgusted and ashamed. I react in the only way that's viable for me. I write a tune with my mate Midge, and we think we'll be out of there by Christmas. But this becomes a phenomenon. The Americans call and say, "Will you come over and do this track?" USA for Africa, okay. And then it occurs to me we can unite this whole idea into a concert, and then we're gone. But except the concert makes millions. But it was the realization that famine is to die of want in a world of surplus is economically illiterate, intellectually absurd and morally repulsive, because you don't die of hunger from lack of food, you die from lack of money. We won't die if there's a famine in Canada. Food will be bought, food will be sent to us. If we run out of food in our larders or our fridge, we go to the supermarket. So it was economics. To change economics, you must engage with the agents of change, which, like it or not, hold your nose, you've got to talk to the politicians. We had a huge lobby, 1.2 billion people, 95% of the television sets on earth watched that concert. They can't ignore, politics is just numbers. They can't ignore it. And so it took 20 years of trawling around the chancelleries of the world. And as that generation, that Live Aid generation came to power, Clinton, Blair, Brown, Schroeder, Cameron, Osborne, the doors opened. And I was able to persuade Blair that for the British G8 in 2005, he puts this wound on the world at the top of the agenda. And he did. But none of the politicians want to do it, so we had to take the 8 most powerful or richest countries, including Canada, do a concert in each of those capitals. The Canadian one was up the road, 1,000 artists, 3.2 billion people, and they caved. And that was the payoff. Instead of in excess of $200 million, you now had $50 billion a year, and you had the cancellation of debt to the poorest people in the world. So things do change, but that instrument of change is no longer plausible. Rock and roll was the central spine of our culture for 50 years.
Well, there's no central spine of anything anymore.
Correct, and that exactly is correct.
I mean, there's something lovely about that, and that we can all have our own tastes. And if I want to like Lawrence Welk, I can like Lawrence Welk, and I can find Lawrence Welk records, and I can listen to it. If I want to like the Talking Heads, I can find Talking Heads. If you want to listen to this, you can listen to it. There's not a monoculture. There's not record labels showing us things anymore. There's something good about it.
That's a minor good. What's less good is that, yes, you can find those things, and then a machine says, if you like this, you like that. So you never move outside the ghetto of the self, the preference of your own. You never find a contrary opinion or something weird musically that you suddenly hear that you never knew, expanded your brain and takes you off in whole directions you couldn't. It's the bookshop, it's the record shop. You go in to buy X and suddenly you see, oh yeah, I've heard about that, why, and you get it. That doesn't happen with if you like this, you like that.
Because you're going to find something too similar
the
to the thing you like.
web has broken down.
Yeah.
The world into individualism, and that's easy for authoritarians to use.
So there's no live. There could never be that again. Like 97% of the televisions in the world, Bob.
95%, yeah.
Watching the same thing, watching a concert.
Yeah.
I mean, I said it on the way in, and I heard you kind of go, when I said it's hard to fathom that now. I mean, the television, like the Tonight Show doesn't get the numbers.
No,
it
was extraordinary.
It couldn't happen again.
No, because we were using what turned out to be the lingua franca of the planet, which wasn't English, it was pop. And we now know 1956, Elvis, Little Richard, they didn't understand, but there was a reaction and a cultural revolution. The Beatles, the Stones and Dylan were pretty aware. The contemptuous insolence of the Rolling Stones, the refusal to be deferential of the Beatles with their positive triple yes, yeah. Dylan mapping out the route. Things are changing, dude. Get out of the way. So I come in that period. I take everything from that, and when my generation happened and things have to change again, we use this medium, this minor art form, but a very powerful medium. Turns out the world is listening to this stuff now, and that won't happen again, and it won't really influence the politics of its time. In fact, the end at Gleneagles in 2005, the day after Live 8, when they agreed to the stuff we demanded, that same day, the new world was introduced. The 21st century came home to roost when ISIS killed 58 people in the buses and tubes of London. And the Prime Minister Blair had to leave the negotiation table for the poorest in the world to deal with the massacre. He came back, and then the deal was pushed through. And so you had the end of a world of political cooperation, consensus and compromise. That won't happen again, not in this current world. And you had the introduction of a new, more barbaric world. And the politicians of today are avatars of that barbarism. You just have to look at the President of the United States trying to cooperate, say, with Xi Jinping or Putin or Erdogan or any of the thugs that populate the political world today. So you can talk about rock and roll not being able to move the needle, but the web, which disables rock and roll.
And should have been able to bring us all
Disable
together.
politics.
It should have been able to bring us all together. We're all on the same platform. It should have been able to in its promise.
You know, the logic of the World Wide Web, this synaptic membrane that wraps itself around the planet, that we're all in touch with each other, presupposes a hive society. In fact, it doesn't. You know, and that's what's odd. And, you know, we thought that it would animate an economy. In fact, it sped it up beyond our understanding. So the whole thing collapses with greed and humiliates country, put millions out of work, puts thousands into suicide. Wars erupt as a result. Millions are on the move to find new work or to escape war. And we threw up our walls and our barriers against it. We've reduced ourselves. The 21st century is reductionist, and it's using a great tool of reductionism, the internet, and we need to know how to use this thing, which is the most powerful tool ever invented. And so you get these old men being angry again, and they make a record that sounds like that.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, angry is the word you chose there, because when you listen to this record, the Boomtown Rats record, the Citizens of Boomtown, I Got the Trash Glam Baby single, you've already talked about this at the beginning of what we were saying, which was that you're kind of singing about the same, nothing has really changed. You're singing about a lot of the same things you were singing back then, the same rage, that same inequality. But Bob, you're sitting on boards, you're still actively advocating for change. Someone who has seen these things the way you have would be very cynical. You don't seem cynical.
I can't be cynical because it worked.
But how are you not cynical now?
The thing that my avatars told me, go down this route, dude. We change things. You can do it. Okay, yeah, I'll try. We had to be a little more empirical. But, you know, there was, I remember one of the things in the paper after Live Aid, the promise of rock and roll has been fulfilled. So John, in his great naivete, saying all you need is love. Turns out, yeah, probably right. It turns out a wop, bop, a lop, bam, boom. Brilliant. Not English. What is that? I don't know, but everybody gets it. So all those things came home to roost.
But how are you not cynical now, right? We just talked about how it couldn't happen now.
No, absolutely it can't happen now, but that doesn't stop you raging against the dying of the light. That doesn't stop you acknowledging that all generations fail and some fail more spectacularly than others. Mine. It doesn't mean that you can't be Greta Thunberg and stand in front of your school silently and just say no. And, you know, you just talked about the single you're holding, Trash Glam Baby. It's a no. The girl I saw in the charity shop 3 years ago, this 16-year-old, this sequined tramp, this living glitter ball, you know, making a theatre of the self, a great rejection of what she'd been told you should look like and behave like. No, that's still there. The possibility to steer your world in the direction you need to live in, that's there. But it ain't this cyber wanking into the digital void. It isn't, yeah, what's it? This is really crap. That's nothing. A 10 billion digital petition is meaningless to authority.
You've met Mark Zuckerberg. Do you think he knows that?
I didn't meet Zuckerberg.
I've seen you talk about him by name, by first name.
Yeah, I call him Mark because he's Mark, because we have him in our back pocket. You know, he's sucking up everything.
I figured since you were calling him one first name, I figured you might have met. That's my mistake.
Yeah, I call him Larry and Sergey. I have met them, you know, but they need to be broken up.
They're
dangerous.
Do they have any idea what they're doing?
No.
I mean, the damage they're doing?
No, they're not. It wasn't none of it. It's all luck. You know, there were loads of Facebooks around. He just made it through because he wanted to meet girls. So everyone said, yeah, that's cool. And because he had the Ivy League pretensions, and everyone thought, okay, I'd love to be in the Ivy League. You do it in advertising all the time. He stumbled upon this. And he built this huge device, and he is to be congratulated for it. But he's gone down a route that is very similar to the industrialists of the 19th century. They are monopolies. They are no person should have that
Standard
power
Oil,
or
same
that
thing,
wealth.
yeah.
You know, no one. And they should be broken up.
So why are you telling these stories now, Bob? I mean, it feels like you're still going. It
I
feels
don't
like
go on about this in the record, but the attitude of the record. I mean, the songs were...
But even about your life, like what's inspired you? I'm looking at this book right now, and on the record, I feel like I don't know. I feel like you're trying to explain, maybe not explain, but I feel like you're telling us where all this came from, as if we could lose it. Do you know what I mean?
Or as if you could give a crap. You know?
I could.
It comes from personal circumstances. That's for sure. I know that. You know, you just get asked about yourself so often. The personal circumstances of me being a kid were not great at all, and so you look for alternatives. You have to function. You need to create an own world in which you can function. And I suppose, in a cliched way, that's the essence of the entrepreneurial type. Winston Churchill never got an exam in his life. Richard Branson never got an exam in his life. So these sort of people are, even the guys we're talking about, they're very socially awkward. People like Zuckerberg or Bill Gates. I know Bill, and here's a guy who took this monstrous thing he'd built and his vast wealth and decided, maybe I can get rid of polio, this curse of humanity that's been there since we existed. One guy thinking, maybe I could do this, or malaria, and pouring that vast brain and those vast resources and getting his mates to do it as well. Exceptional. Socially awkward for sure. He's learned how to do it, but you can see these people learning. And in their earlier life, they need to create, as I said, an own universe in which they can function. But in order to create that, they must create a world for themselves. And I'm not socially awkward, but
no, you're fine.
It was an unwelcoming and cold and fairly bleak world. So I found something, rock and roll, that I grabbed hold of, and for dear life, and still you would have to break my fingers to prise my hands away from that golden thread. Who was that guy? Was it not Clint Eastwood? Who was the head of the NRA? And Charlton Heston.
Charlton Heston, yeah. From my cold, dead hands.
Yeah, exactly. Well, rock and roll doesn't give you cold or dead hands. They give you warm, glowing ones. You play things with them.
Bob, nice to talk to you.
Cheers, man.